What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot. Folks, it's finally that time of year. It is time to run our final Scott Fish Bowl mock. I think the last run of invites is going out as we speak, but not only is the last run of invites going out, slow drafts start Monday. Live drafts have already started. It's going to be absolutely nuts. And I think it's time to get that final mock in, and especially since I'm able to get some of my league mates into this mock and I can figure out what their strategy is going to be. Let's get into it. What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. As mentioned, time for another Scott Fish Bowl mock. My partner in crime, Austin Amandolia. Austin, how are you doing this morning?
Doing great. I finally got into Scott Fish Bowl. I'm in the Hermione Granger division, so I'm excited to get to mock with the intention of drafting next week.
So completely was thinking when I woke up this morning, am I making Austin talk about a draft that he never even got into? Am I just pouring salt in the wound? So I immediately went and looked for your name on the slow draft list and found you there at the Scott Fish Bowl. So glad you made it in, my friend.
Yeah, 3 years running. It's gonna be my third year. So goal is to do better than last year, which is a pretty low bar because I was garbage last year.
There you go. And our guest this week, a friend of mine who is a live entry into Scott Fish Bowl. We met at the New York City Live last year. Lewis Hall. Lewis, welcome, my friend.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity to come on today and talk a little bit about the live draft and my experience last year and meeting you and really just the community at play here.
I'm going to warn everybody not about Lewis because Lewis is amazing, and you guys get to hear his accent the whole show. It occurred to me as I was doing the intro that I forgot to hook my Ethernet in, so I'm doing this on Wi-Fi. So if my internet starts to get spacey at some point while these guys are talking, I may actually just step away and hook my Wi-Fi up because I'm terrified to do this show without Wi-Fi. But that is a problem for later, folks. It is time to talk Scott Fish Bowl. Let's get this draft up. Let's get this draft started because last week this draft ran way too damn long. So JB Barry is on the clock. I'm going to go ahead and get that started. I also did a 30-second clock this time around because the option was to do fewer rounds or fewer seconds, and it's a mock draft, so I think fewer seconds works fine. If you are not familiar with Scott Fish Bowl, just head to scottfishbowl.com and you'll get everything. This is the 14th year of Scott Fish Bowl. This is a super flex, massive tournament, big tight end premium, and return yards. Those are the basics of the rules. I could pop them up on the screen, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Another quick reminder, if you're here to hear us talk about every team on the screen, it's not going to happen. The long and short is that is not what this show is about. We do not rate and review every team. This is about learning through mock drafting. We're going to look for interesting trends, interesting draft strategies at the end of the show. Lewis and Austin will recap their drafts. I may pick an oops of the draft if somebody does something absolutely terrible. And speaking of that, Vince Mapstone picking from the 11 spot. That's my slot. So I'm going to be keeping a keen eye on what you're doing in this draft. Let's talk about our drafters before I start asking these guys some questions. From the 1 spot, JB Barry. He is, I believe, in the Blade division with us. MB Fulco at the 2 spot. Sorry if I killed your name. Diamond Mike at the 3. Hawks Life at the 4. Scampers, our good friend, at the 5. Lewis chose the 6, and he is on the clock right now. Duarte at the 7. Beats by Dre at the 8. Awesome name. Austin took the 9. Shia LaBeouf took the 10. Vince Mapstone, as mentioned, at the 11. And Wilson at the 12. This is a 3rd round reversal tournament, so you'll see that happen. One of my co-hosts, your sound is on. Click the little button to turn the sound off. We don't want to hear every sleeper notification as it's going on. So take a look at that. But let's talk a little bit about Scott Fish Bowl. But I want to start, as I often do when I have the non-analyst on the show with us. Lewis, how did you get started in fantasy football? Because obviously with your accent, you're not natively American. Where did fantasy football enter your life?
I've been into football I've been playing fantasy football now for over 10 years. We were fortunate in the UK that we started getting the international games and it generated a lot of buzz. And from there, we heard about fantasy football. I got into it with some British friends. That league is still going, sort of 12 years strong. Since I've been in the US now for 7 years, that's become a few leagues I'm commissioner of. It's become dynasty leagues. I consumed so much content that I actually heard about the Scott Fish Bowl through some of the podcasts I listened to. I got in last year via actually donating to St. Jude's CBS run in their sort of podathon. I managed to get in and bid on on an eBay thing to draft with Chris Towers from CBS, and Brian, that's where I met you, obviously. And I was fortunate enough to get in this year. But I was on the Fantasy Cares live stream every day in December during Christmas, and managed to answer a trivia question about Ronda Rousey faster than anyone else, and got back in for a second year. So I've kind of cheated my way in, but not really, because that's kind of what we're about, right? It's about Fantasy Cares and listening to those guys and the streams and getting in via any means possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, if I remember correctly, I'm going to feel really dumb if I'm wrong here. I believe it was you who told me the story that you and your friends got heavy into football during the Pittsburgh Steelers Arizona Cardinals Super Bowl, and you guys kind of like chose sides around that game, correct?
You're exactly correct. We decided to see what the fuss was about one year, why Americans kind of, in a country that, in a sport that one country plays, call themselves the world champions. So we stayed up late. We got a load of American beers, a load of American snacks. We had Twinkies and jerky and Papa John's and all sorts. And yeah, I got hooked in it from there. That was a great Super Bowl, and become a Steelers fan sort of from there. And yeah, big fan.
All right. I absolutely love that. I had this as a 2-part question. How did you get into fantasy and how did you get into Scott Fish? But you've already covered both parts of that. So let's get into a little bit of the Scott Fish Bowl. And Austin, as I mentioned, this is a super flex tournament. But there is some zig when others zag type aspect to it, and you can see that in the first round of this tournament. My question to you is, if you're not going to go quarterback in the first round, is this a running back year? Is this a wide receiver year? In most redraft, or at least most best ball right now, it's very much a big wide receiver year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, a little bit on how you want to approach it overall. But what I will say is, for the running backs, they do have a kind of a bonus associated with them this year, because they're getting points for every rushing attempt. So that can really help give them a bit of a better floor. I think I would still prefer to go wide receiver early, because they're getting that full point for receptions, whereas running backs are only getting half points for receptions. So I think receivers are still going to carry a significant amount of points. So it's worth it. Oh man, I got double sniped just before this. So I think I would still probably start out wide receiver early if I'm not taking quarterbacks early in this super flex format.
I did a mock with our friends over at Mock Girl Summer last night and had a 5Q setup for my next pick. 5 wide receivers. It was a wide receiver run that wiped out my entire queue leading up to my pick. I was like, well, if this weren't a mock, I'd be on full tilt right now and would have no idea who to make at that pick. So that always makes it interesting when the snipe happens there. Lewis, you are at about 10 seconds on your clock. I want to make sure you're fully aware of that. Okay, perfect. I don't want to see any
thing and giving you guys some time to kind of get there. So
you make all your picks. Don't worry about that. Anybody who's watched the show before knows that the draft is going on in the background. We may talk about it a little bit. We'll certainly talk about it a little bit, but this is more about the conversation. And if it's an auto pick, it's an auto pick. Not that big a deal. That's why we mock draft. Lewis, is there any chance, and I don't mean this, Lewis is in my division, folks. I don't mean this to pry, but is there any chance you're not going quarterback in the first round? It seems like in this super flex draft, getting your quarterback early, especially if you're in the first half, seems to be really important with the third round reversal. We were having a chat with a 101 pick today, where I guess in the 101 chat, they are flirting with Christian McCaffrey as the first overall pick. And I just think that's terrifying and not a great idea.
Yeah, honestly, I think if Lamar had gone before me, I would have pivoted and gone McCaffrey. I think I like the upside of all of the rushing quarterbacks. Truthfully, my guy went earlier than I thought he would. Not to reveal, but JB, I know you were talking about him a lot.
Oh, I see that now. Yeah.
That's who I've kind of typically seen. It's him or CeeDee Lamb, typically around the 6. So I was kind of surprised to see Lamar there. Truthfully, I think if those 5 quarterbacks have gone off the board, I would take McCaffrey over Stroud, just because of the kind of the lack of rushing upside, I guess, from Stroud, and just what we get really from the running backs this year.
Now Lewis, this is your second year in Scott Fish Bowl, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
We are 2 years removed from Travis Kelce being a locked in first round pick. And there were still talks about it last year that the tight end premium is enough to consider that. It seems like the world has backed off of early tight end, with Laporta going at the 2-6, 1 pick before you. In your opinion, on the research you've done with Scott Fish Bowl, is there anybody even at the back end of the first round who should be looking tight end this year, Lewis?
For me, no. And that's because I think, last year Laporta's performance was kind of really heavy on touchdowns. That could regress this year. You've got Kelsey, who kind of maybe on a bit of a snap count, keeping him fresh for that three-peat. And I really just think the depth of the position overall allows us to kind of push that back a little bit and kind of focus on other areas and take your tight end in sort of more of the middle rounds.
Yeah, last year was kind of a revelation for tight ends coming out of nowhere, and we now have like a top 10 and a top 12 that are viable options. So that's a really good point. You're the first person I've heard throw out Travis Kelce being on a snap count, and that's a very interesting take because he is an old man at this point. And with my beard, I'm allowed to call him an old man. He is an old man at this point, and it's interesting to think that's something I hadn't even really considered. Austin, just basically same question. Are we fading tight ends too much in this very heavy tight end premium, or has the field caught up with the kind of elite guys?
Yeah, I think we're fading them a little bit too much because even if you think the field has caught up to the elite guys, the last tight end I wanted. Oh, wait, no. There's one more tight end I would like. Most of the tight ends that I want are almost gone at this point, already in the 4th round. And then after that, I don't have interest in a significant portion of the quarterbacks at a premium draft slot. So if I'm missing out on that top 8, which I think I'm going to because I don't really want to reach on George Kittle right now.
Austin making this decision in real time, folks. He is on the clock trying to decide if it's time to take a tight end or not.
And I decided it wasn't because I don't want to reach on George Kittle. I decided to go Drake London instead. But I do think like all of these tight ends, having them in the first 4 rounds is warranted given their upside in this format. I'll be curious to see how the rest of the tight ends fall because I don't think that the rest should necessarily be pushed up as high because of the scoring format.
Lewis, as the lone Brit, maybe in our division for sure, do you feel that you are entitled to Drake London? Like, is that someone you should be able to have on all of your teams?
I love the question. I think he's going to have a great year. I've tried to snag him everywhere in Dynasty, but again, because people know I'm a Brit, they definitely charge a premium.
I love that I just swear I made that up on the fly, but it's an actual thing.
Genuine thing.
That's awesome. Folks, I did forget to say this at the top of the show because I'm always so interested to get us started. But in case you haven't noticed, we have partnered with Dynasty Nerds. They have a ton of tools to help you dominate your league mates and build a true dynasty. If you go to dynastynerds.com or download the Dynasty Nerds mobile app and use promo code ClubFantasy, you can get 15% off of your subscription. So make sure you guys are checking that out. And there was a bit of a revelation early on in the show, and by that I mean the pre-show, where we all realized maybe we don't love these kick returners as much as we thought we did. And I think that is a very hot take. So Austin, you're the one who asked for this to be put in the show sheet. My exact question, the way I worded it is, how much should we focus on return yards? And you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, my main opinion is I'm frankly not going to get too caught up in it. I'm going to focus on getting elite playmakers because I don't feel that the kick return yardage is going to be predictive year over year in general, even in our like old kickoff format. And now with the new special team rules, I especially don't think it's going to be predictive. So the poster child of this whole bit has been Rashid Shaheed, who did lead the league in all-purpose yards last year, in part because of his punt and kick return prowess. However, that has not been sticky. So 2 years ago, 2022, if you were to look at kick returner guys that had a ton of yardage, you would be looking at a guy like DeAndre Carter with the Chargers and Ray McCloud with San Francisco, because they each racked up over 800 yards via kick returns. Rashid Shaheed was way down in 16th in that ranking. You go back even further to 2021, Cordell Patterson actually racked up 400 return yards that year. Then you have guys like Braxton Berrios, Deontay Hardy, and then even before then, back to 2020, you get Andre Roberts up there in the top 5. I mean, these are random guys. Mecole Hardman was number 2 in 2019, but some of that was because of his receiving yards, but he did get a lot of kick return yards. So overall, I don't feel like we can predict accurately year to year who's going to be the primary kick or punt returner for teams. And I think for me, my strategy is going to be focus on elite players, and then I'm going to spend a ton of fab in the early weeks if I identify a player that I think is going to keep the kick or punt return position.
Scott Fish, and it wasn't the potathon. It was actually before Scamper said that you're just table talking his entire queue right now. But Scott Fish mentioned that he thought waivers in week 1 this year are going to be absolutely nuts after we see who are going to be the primary kick returners. And JB has a piece of advice for Lewis. He says you have to answer all questions as riddles during this podcast so that I don't get any information from you that you don't want me to have. I think that's a great point from JB there. Wasn't it JB last year who did his draft picks as riddles?
Every pick. I loved it. And yeah, it was phenomenal. It became so funny that I kind of focused more on his riddles before he was too.
Yeah, you were doing our stickers. That's right.
No. I was in that draft. You were watching it. You were in.
Oh, it was the other way around. That's right. I was helping.
You were in Hutch's dad's ear draft, helping him draft. And so I was competing against you, even though you weren't in the division. But
there you go.
I had JB a couple of picks to my right hand side. So every time it was getting around to him, it was I was kind of more interested in his riddle than seeing who was left in my queue and who I'd be picking from. And yeah, that's the excuse I'm sticking to anyway.
I love it. And Lewis, you added some interesting points when we were talking about kick returners off air that you thought we could maybe start seeing some of the bigger name guys returning kicks, to where a lot of these ancillary guys who were just kind of thrown on kick returns last year, they may lose their job to bigger names.
Yeah, I just think I think it's going to be electric, right? I think it's going to be one of those things that's going to be. I think we're going to be seeing so many highlights from this play this year that I think that the players are just going to want to get involved in that and sort of have a highlight reel moment. And I think we're going to just see that, maybe the names I kind of threw out earlier, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, these kind of guys that might be able to change games by doing this, if in close games and kind of maybe tag in and kind of help out the team by doing this, by doing the return. So yeah, I think it's a weapon a lot of teams will use, and I think some of the bigger players will get involved in that.
And then I'm going to throw my theory out, just again going at Rashid Shaheed, which is not where I thought this show was going to go today. Is a lot of the early experts who looked at this and looked at it from the XFL and things, they thought this was going to be a format that favors running backs. And what I find interesting about the New Orleans Saints is they have Alvin Kamara, but more importantly, they have Jamal Williams and Kendry Miller, who they're going to look to try to get on the field more often. If this is truly a running backs format, Shaheed could lose some of those valuable touches. He was like the only kick returner for the Saints last year. And I don't think we're going to see a situation where there's one kick returner for any team. So if you're looking at some of these teams like the Chargers and Darius Davis and Rashid Shaheed with the Saints, I don't think we're going to be in a situation where we're going to see one guy doing all of the work. And I think that's something we need to consider when we're figuring out where to take these guys at ADP. Before we continue, I like to recap the first 3 rounds. This will be the only recap you guys see me do. I like to run through the first 3 rounds and ask you guys if anything stood out. So we started with a quarterback run: Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Christian McCaffrey, the first non-quarterback off the board. As we talked about, Lamar Jackson falls to Lewis, a player he was interested in with the rushing upside. CJ Stroud at 7, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Joe Burrow at 8, 9, and 10, Bijan Robinson, Justin Jefferson to finish it out. We start the second round with Jamar Chase, Breece Hall, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Go back to the quarterbacks with Kyler and Dak. Sam Laporta, first tight end off the board. Puka Nacua, Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Kelce, A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor round out the second round, and then it is a third round reversal. So we pop all the way back over to Wilson 27, who took Jordan Love. We have Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr. before Garrett Wilson, Mark Andrews as the third tight end off the board, Chris Olave, Dalton Kincaid, Justin Herbert, the only 2 quarterbacks taken in the third round, Travis Etienne, Kyron Williams, Josh Jacobs, Michael Pittman. My first question to each of you guys, and Austin, I'll have you get us started, is, as it always is, when you look at these first 3 rounds, were there any surprises to you at all, Austin?
Yeah, I think the primary surprise that I have is honestly how pushed up the running backs are, because I still, as valuable as those extra quarter of a points per touches, it still takes 4 running back carries to match a single catch by a receiver. And so to me, I'm still wanting to value those receivers because of how easy it is for them to get full points, whereas the running backs kind of just continue to, they have to really chip away at that throughout the course of the game. And, the running backs that are going in the first 2 rounds, they all feel like pretty secure on that front. They're going to carry the bulk of the load. The ones, I think once you get to the third round, I have a little bit of question about Kyron Williams and Josh Jacobs because they have had such heavy loads and they might want to be spread out a little bit more this year. So I think that's going to be something I'm paying attention to when I'm drafting. It's just where are the running backs going and how early do I feel comfortable actually taking one?
Lewis, same question. When you see those first 3 rounds, did anything shock you a little bit?
Not for me. I think the thing I kind of love the value on Jordan Love and Justin Herbert in the third round, even with the passing yards kind of nerfed a little bit this year. I just think those two could kind of. Jordan Love, I guess, is kind of near towards the end of the second round, but I kind of thought Herbert might go earlier. I think the real thing I point out, and I know, Ryan, is how the professionals do it, as they say, in terms of segue into something we'll talk about. But looking at JB's build with the 3 Colts, right? So that's 2 things that we'd kind of spoken about. Obviously, the stacking side of things, and also the bye week side of things, with all of them being on bye in week 14.
Yeah, JB, without even realizing it, has provided all the content we need for this draft. But we're not going to jump ahead on that. So great job, JB. But I do kind of want to lean into that because that is kind of the next segment that we're going to talk about. And again, guys, we will get to the draft. The draft is about to fall off the screen. I tend to leave the top half of the draft on the screen longer because these are the most important picks. So it's great for you guys to be able to see where players you're interested in might be going. And for folks not in Scott Fishbowl, if you play in a tight end premium super flex, this is a good way to see ADP. You can kind of see where players are falling. So still good information here. Austin, I feel like we talked about this 2 weeks ago, but I wanted to double check with you. A tournament of this size has, to me, obvious ties to best ball and DFS. And you and I have now done shows together for 3 years, mainly DFS shows. Should that be the strategy? A lot of what I'm doing when I look at these big tournaments is stuff I learned from you. Should that be a strategy? Should your strategy reflect that you're not competing just against the 12 guys in your league, you're competing against 3,000 other people?
I think if your goal in all of this is to do well and to score really highly, to kind of like place towards the top, yes. If your goal is just to have fun, like whatever, do what you want. But
that should be your goal. I'm just going to interrupt Austin real quick. Your goal should be to just have fun. Do you want to win this thing? Obviously. But the 12 people you're about to draft with, that's a fast friendship. Make sure you have fun with these folks. So.
Yes, for sure. I think in terms of strategy and placing high, I think the one of the primary best ball DFS concepts I think applies to Scott Fishbowl is just being willing to do something differently than what the rest of the field is doing, and to really be willing to take to buy in on your player takes. Like a lot of us, when we started out, we played in a home league, maybe 10 to 12 person league, and sometimes in those leagues it becomes really clear really quickly which fantasy players are better than others. And you can often just stick to a consistent strategy, and you can play pretty conservative at times, right? Like, and when you're playing in a home league with friends, sometimes it's pretty easy to just be the guy that's like, okay, I'm going to wait on my quarterback. I'm going to get someone good. I'm not going to overreach on somebody. I know that this guy's going to break out, and other people might not be as in tune to those trends. Scott Fish, there's a lot more sharp people in the field. They all are drafting all the time. They have multiple teams. And so it's an opportunity where you want to be a little bit more risky. You want to be willing to take players ahead of ADP. You need to be willing to do different types of roster builds than other teams, just to get different if you're going to experience success, because doing the same old thing, it becomes challenging to really hit your ceiling that way. And it's also honestly kind of less fun. It's kind of fun. Like, it's a free tournament, and it's like, sure, let me try this random strategy I've never tried before and see how it pans out.
It worked out well for me last year. Again, Vince Mapstone's going from the 11th spot, a similar strategy to what I did last year, though I didn't have the balls to wait on my second quarterback the way he's doing right now. So I'm going to be interested to see how that shakes out. And Lewis, I'm going to start with you on this because it's something we kind of talked about already, and you were the first one to notice it. How do you feel about stacking in a tournament like this? There are waivers, so it's not quite best ball where you need to be super focused on bye weeks and things like that. But stacking in bye weeks, and famous Jay in the chat, I had already asked, how do we feel about bye weeks? As someone who, I don't want to say you don't live and breathe fantasy football, but it's not your main goal in life. Do you focus a lot on bye weeks when you go into these things, or are you just taking best player available?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually in the Sixes chat earlier, I kind of asked this question just to kind of feel what the group kind of thought, in the sense of, how much do we want to put the emphasis on the bye weeks? But given, this is an 11-week tournament, you compete against each of your division rivals. You're trying to win to get in, and then in the playoffs, it's obviously about kind of your points accumulated. So JB is very confident, obviously, that he's going to make the playoffs with a Colts build, but then for week 14, he kind of loses. So it loses out from that. So I don't put too much emphasis on it. It's still kind of a best player available, or kind of what's best for your roster build. But I would use it as a tiebreaker in certain situations, as I'm kind of thinking about two players when I'm kind of on the clock.
Wonderful advice. That's really how I focus on bye weeks in general, is a tiebreaker. Austin, I'm going to hit the stacking thing with you. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and highlight his team because we've been talking about it. JB grabs Richardson, Taylor, and Pittman. And I think that Lewis just hit a really interesting point when it comes to that. And it's something we talked about with our last draft last week, was their bye week is late. I think like Lewis said, it's week 14. In a league where you are counting your week 14 with your cumulative average, is stacking 3 guys with a week 14 bye a mistake?
I don't think it's a mistake. I think you can just get by with it, especially because you're still betting on that team to pop off throughout the season. You're betting, like in this case for JB Berry, you're betting on the Colts to be really successful this year. And I think if they do hit and they are scoring a ton of touchdowns, that's going to still lift up your overall average. And it's, with this team build that JB has, it's going to be easy to replace Michael Pittman. You need one good week from one random running back in week 14, and then you need Baker Mayfield to, have a decent afternoon. So I don't think it's too much to me. I feel like if you start to get in the 4 or 5 range in a tournament like this, then it starts to feel less comfortable to me. But if you have 3 players from the same team, like, sure, why not? That feels totally comfortable to me.
And JB Berry actually jumps in and says that he will now consider buys on his bench, not for his starters. He's going to avoid a quarterback with a week 14 bye. I think you guys, this is great Scott Fishbowl information for those out there, and great best ball information as well. Just any of these big tournaments. This is stuff to pay attention to here, guys. Austin, I'm going to have you keep going because we kind of talked about this with the playoffs. One of the things that you have ingrained in me, or not even like on purpose, but just from doing shows with you, is building for week 17 when you're in these best ball tournaments. If you're going in with the objective to win $1 million, building for week 17 because that's the championship week. Scott Fishbowl, very similar type thing. Week 17 is going to matter a lot because it's your week 17 score and your cumulative score that is going to help you win a championship. However, the playoffs start in week 12. Could you get too in the weeds with these playoffs, Austin? I think your answer is going to be yes, because you just said you don't care if you stack week 14 guys. So I guess if you're playing this thing to win it, would you just stick with your best ball build of like weeks 15, 16, and 17, or would you expand?
I would kind of do neither. I'm kind of focused less on the playoffs. I'll look a little bit at matchups starting at week 12. And, if similar to what Lewis said earlier about tiebreakers, it could be a tiebreaker for me. If I'm picking between two different teams, I might pick, or 2 different players, I might pick a player who plays on a team that matches up with someone I have in one of those later weeks in the tournament rounds. But I think because of the way that you kind of average your scores throughout the season, it does lessen the impact of like this 1 week could change it all for me. Could be the difference between winning $1,000 and $1 million, right? Like that's like part of the reason we care about it. And best ball is like it can be a significant game changer. But for this tournament, I'm going to be interested in it. I'm still going to be looking at it, but I might not necessarily go all out and build all sorts of different stacks and correlations between all of the playoff weeks as I typically would when I'm doing best ball on Underdog or DraftKings.
And then, believe it or not, this was actually on my show sheet, Lewis. So it's funny that this has become the JB Berry show. I always joke that we're not going to talk about your team. JB Berry has dominated the show so far. My question is there more risk to a guy like Anthony Richardson in a league like this? We know the reward, but quarterbacks are going to go off the board like crazy. Do you have to go in knowing that you need multiple backup quarterbacks, or are you just willing to take the risk? But I guess my real question is Richardson more risky in a super flex league?
I find it a difficult answer, right? Because my instinct is to say no, despite obviously him getting hurt in pretty much every game he played last year. I think if like Jalen Hurts, for example, has kind of stayed healthy. Obviously, he had the Steichen offensive scheme before. He stayed relatively healthy compared to Richardson. Richardson's built like a unit. He can handle the hits. It's more like a Jaden Daniels is someone I worry about significantly more in that kind of answer. I'm pretty comfortable with Richardson, his size, his build, the way kind of despite he plays the game a little reckless. I don't worry about it. And back to Austin's point, in tournaments this big, you kind of shoot for upside, and there's very few players on the board with as much upside as Anthony Richardson.
I love that you're like, he's not risky, even though he's gotten hurt in every game he's played so far. Best Anthony Richardson answer ever. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and scroll the draft board, but Austin, I'm going to give you some time to talk about Richardson as well. I disagree with Lewis, and I do see more risk when it comes to Richardson. Am I wrong? I mean, just putting it bluntly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think it's a risk, but I think it's a risk worth taking. Like it's sometimes I would say it's too risky. Don't do it. In best ball, first off, you are never drafting Anthony Richardson in the first round unless you're trying to donate your money to the sports betting websites. But in Scott Fishbowl, you are donating your money. So like, why not? Like it is.
You're literally donating your money.
Yeah. It's a risk. It could definitely play out poorly. Like, especially the way JB has built their team with Baker being the only other quarterback at this point. Like now Gardner Minshew, still, if Anthony Richardson goes down, team,
JB just won the whole draft. Gardner Minshew. That's my guy.
I know. That is
he
your
literally
guy.
is my favorite player and least favorite player. No offense to Anthony Richardson, but he has adopted my least favorite player title this year.
So. Yeah. So Anthony Richardson, not a risk I want to take because I don't bet on the guy. But whenever you're doing a draft like this, a tournament this large, you're drafting as if you're right. And if you're right on Anthony Richardson, he is worth taking him at the one spot because he could be the number one quarterback at the end of the year based on what he showed last year. It is possible, but
yeah,
it's risky.
No easy segue, but Wilson just dropped in the chat. Vikings rookie corner Kyrie Jackson passed away at 24 years old. So hug your loved ones. Make sure that you know tomorrow's not promised. Really nothing to really go from that, but sad news. Hate to have to report it on the show. Moving back to fantasy football because what else can we do? Lewis, there is a wide receiver who I think his name has come up, and there's a very specific reason I stopped in the 5th round. There's a wide receiver whose name has come up a lot as either being a value or a risk. And guess what? JB fucking Berry drafted him. Cooper Kupp at the 512. What is your take on Cooper Kupp? And believe it or not, the other guy, I swear to you, I wish I could show you my show sheet. The next guy I want to talk about is Chris Godwin. JB Berry clearly had eyes on my show sheet before this to make sure all we were going to do was talk about his team. Hilarious. But Cooper Kupp, what are your thoughts on Cooper Kupp? Because the world has went nuts on Puka Nacua. He's now a first-round pick in redraft leagues. But Cooper Kupp, honestly, where JB got him right now is where he's going in most normal fantasy drafts that aren't Superflex. How do we feel about Kupp this year?
And it's funny, we didn't plan this at all, obviously, but I drafted Puka in the 2nd round, right? So
there you go.
in that sense, the first person to ask. I think truthfully, just with the way the team is structured, I think both could eat. I think I do think the kind of the community is kind of sleeping a little bit on Kupp. I think we're quick to have written him off and think that he's injury prone or that Puka's just too good. I think we could see them both be top 12 wide receivers this year. Stafford loves to throw the ball. And I think the upside. I also just love the kind of the breakfast narrative that we hear about so much. And,
buddies, yep.
He's going to want to throw the ball to his boy, and the way they played last year. I think they're playoff contenders, and who knows? So I think Kupp's a value where JB got him.
And what's funny is the narrative on Kupp seems to be that he's a value, Austin, but it's not really changing his draft capital at all. Everybody's like, Kupp's a value, but he's just stuck in the 5th round. So is he really a value? Like, is this just what we expect of him?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there's got to be enough people out there that think he's not a value for that to be happening. Yeah. I think it seems like the fantasy community and content creators are saying that he's a value, but there's a lot of people drafting out there who
I'd say the drafters clearly don't agree or care what we have to say.
well, there's that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that aren't paying as much attention as we are, or are just going off of what happened last year. And it's a totally fair approach. Like, we know that receivers, when they hit a certain age, they start to get injury prone, and hamstring injuries can really creep up and keep people from performing at their best. But I think he's still a value, and hey, don't complain about it, Ryan. Just like let him still be a value.
Oh, no shit.
Have to
Like,
change
yes,
his ADP.
I need him to keep falling. Let's be perfect, especially with my Scott Fishbowl draft strategy. I need to, well, JB's in my draft, Lewis is in my draft. It's not going to work out well for me, but I need him to keep falling without a doubt. I brought this up last week. The Kupp hamstring narrative is interesting to me because we use this same thing to try to down talk Adam Thielen for years, and this guy just keeps dropping top 20 seasons. So it does not worry me at all. Austin, the reason I tied Chris Godwin into this, and JB with the Baker Mayfield Chris Godwin stack, there was a news report yesterday that Chris Godwin is going to play the Cooper Kupp role in Tampa Bay's offense. And I'm not going to lie to you, stars appeared above my eyes. I already love Tampa Bay. I love Chris Godwin. I love Mike Evans more. And both of those guys can eat, but this is a Rams-esque offense. Obviously, coach speak season is in full effect, but Austin, could Chris Godwin be an insane value in fantasy football this year?
I mean, I think he, aside from that news, I think he could be anyways because he's Chris Godwin. I do think I have heard that they're trying to put him back in the slot more this year, which I think is huge for his usage and for his success in fantasy football. Anytime that we're in June, July, and somebody says X player is going to be the Y role, I'm like,
hey,
I'm out.
It worked for Justin Jefferson, damn it.
It did not work though.
Who cares if he was already great? It worked for him.
It did not work, however, when we said Antonio Gibson was going to take the Christian McCaffrey role.
It did not.
So I'm not gonna let that sway me too much. But Chris Godwin, I do love. Like, getting him in the 7th round is incredible in any format that you're in.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Lewis, how much do you feed into or read into coach speak? As someone who obviously you take fantasy more seriously than what I would call the average fantasy person, because you're doing fantasy drafts in July and you've been doing mock drafts with us since June and May. When you see this coach speak, have you kind of separated yourself from it, or are you like me and get starry-eyed when coaches talk players up? Because I've been doing this for years and I do it 12 months a year. I am a sucker for coach speak. I bite hook, line, and sinker every single time.
I think the two things I love most is one. I think a lot of it's confirmation bias, right? Like you hear something slightly good about your guy, and it's like, oh yes, it's the breakout's coming, or I've had this guy in Dynasty for so many years, and he's finally getting his shot or something. I think the other side of it is we rarely hear anything negative, right? I think Dan Campbell, how we spoke about Jameson Williams for the last couple of years, has been kind of the only person I can really kind of think off the top of my head of where I've heard negative coach speak, or but it's pretty much all positive, right? So it's hard to. Sean Payton does a bit of that as well. He's a bit more open with us, but you have to kind of get past his fluff to realize what he told you the truth in the middle of it or was. But it's hard to focus too much on the positive, because it doesn't get outweighed by any negative.
All right, we're going to start getting into some more draft talk here in a second, and these guys will be breaking down their drafts here in just a moment. But as Austin's fully aware, and Lewis, you're probably aware as well, and all of our viewers, I like to sneak in a game of keep, trade, cut, and I always try to make it interesting for the format, and this one could not have played out more perfectly. Keep, trade, cut, Austin, the later round starting tight ends, and they actually happen to go in a group: Cole Kmet, Pat Freiermuth, Dalton Schultz. These guys are all starters for their team. Obviously, feelings are varied, especially for Cole Kmet in the club fantasy community. But keep, trade, cut, Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz, Pat Freiermuth, Austin.
Well, joke's on you, my friend. I drafted 2 of the 3 of those. So.
Oh my God, I didn't even notice that. I have everything scrolled right now. I'm not paying that much attention. So yeah, that's even funnier. What a weird show where you guys just drafted all the players on my show sheet. That never happens.
Yeah. So this actually makes my life really a lot easier.
Well, yeah, I think I know which one you're cutting.
This is the best keep, trade, cut I've ever had. I'll keep Cole Kmet. I will cut Pat Freiermuth, and I'll trade Dalton Schultz. Easy.
Hilariously, that was also my answer because yes, I have turned full on Cole Kmet and now appreciate him, and I love what I think the Bears could be this year. So this ended up being way worse than what I thought it was now. So Lewis, your chance to save us here. Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz, Pat Fryermuth. How do you rank them? Keep, trade, cut.
I'm going to go complete different to you guys.
Yes,
so
thank God, or this show would have sucked.
Yeah, so I'm a Steelers fan that actually never likes having Steelers players on my team because it hurts twice when they're bad or if they get hurt. But in this scenario, I'd actually keep Pat Fryermuth. So despite what Arthur Smith did to Kyle Pitts last year and prioritizing Jonnu Smith instead, I just kind of like that offense for a tight end. Darnell Washington, I don't think is real kind of competition for him. So I would actually keep Pat Fryermuth. I would trade Dalton Schultz. I think he probably still carries a bit of name value. We might be able to hang on to Stephon Diggs is on a downturn. Tank Dell's injury might still impact him. So maybe we can trade him off of that and actually cut Cole Kmet off the back of Gerald Everett following Shane Waldron into Chicago and just the amount of options they have there and Caleb being a rookie quarterback as good as he's probably going to be. The Bears have never had a 4,000 yard passer. He's a rookie despite how good he'll be. And so I kind of worry for what his upside might be in that team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that you brought up drafting with your fandom. I am from Northeast Ohio. Most of my leagues are still based out of, I don't want to say most, a few of my leagues are still based out of Northeast Ohio. And these guys are suckers for Cleveland Browns players. And you want to talk about being disappointed twice. I think if you're a Browns fan, you get to be disappointed 3 times because it just does not work out well. Guys, we have done great on time. You guys did great with the draft. Normally, I'm still 80 questions in at this point, but maybe because JB took all of our guys, it's a little easier. I do want to just take a quick look at the second half of the draft. So everything from kind of like 7th round on, I'm going to list out some guys who I think were interesting picks that I'm a little shocked fell this late, but I'm going to ask you guys to do the same if there's anybody who stands out, if you guys want to kind of scan your board. And a couple of the ones that jumped out to me when I was kind of like scanning is, first and foremost, I'm going to start all the way down here. Courtland Sutton is still his team's wide receiver 1, and he is going where some teams' 3rd wide receivers are being taken. Tyler Lockett, I love Tyler Lockett, a 12th round pick. Even in this draft capital, he is the 3rd wide receiver in Seattle. Courtland Sutton is the number 1 in Denver. So that one was a little bit weird to me. Austin and I talk about this all the time. And Vince, I am so glad you drafted him from the 11th spot. The hatred of Bryce Young in the Superflex community is insane to me. And Austin, your guy Daniel Jones goes a little bit before that, but we're getting starting quarterbacks. There's a chance Russell Wilson plays all 15 games this year. And in a Superflex, he just went in the 12th round. I said all 15. But 15 is probably the best you can hope from him. So those were some of the names when I look. Everything else kind of makes sense to me. Austin Eckler could be a steal for Lewis there. But Courtland Sutton going so late as a team's wide receiver 1 in these late quarterbacks. Austin, do any of these jump out at you, or do you have any feelings about the guys that I pointed out?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you on most of the guys you pointed out. I think the thing that surprises me most about this draft is just the sheer number of running backs going off the board. I talked about it earlier. I'm not convinced our running backs are going to be as dominant, particularly these guys at this range that you're betting on an injury or they're their team's 2nd or 3rd best running back. It's going to take 4 carries to match a single catch by a wide receiver at this point for each of these running backs. And some of these running backs are not pass catching running backs. Like Gus Edwards, he's not going to catch a pass all year. Ezekiel Elliott, he's not going to catch a pass all year. J.K. Dobbins may catch passes. He may be on the field. So I'm a little bit surprised by that, particularly also with the fact that you only have to start 1 running back. Yeah. So for me, I'm going to try and fit as many of my flex positions with receivers as possible because of the greater upside there. And I would expect that there would be fewer running backs coming off the board, but I think people are still are loving the floor and the safety that the running back carry points can bring.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. You kind of hit like, this would be a time to start taking some of those 3rd wide receivers versus a 3rd running back, even though everybody in the world seems to want running back depth. So Lewis, again, just looking kind of from the 7th round on, did any picks shock you? You don't necessarily need to talk about anybody you drafted because I'm going to give you that second here in just a moment. I did find it interesting. Rashid Shaheed, after we shit on him this whole draft, falls all the way to the 10th round. So
yeah, no, I didn't think there's any real big surprises. I think I was kind of a little bit surprised about some of the tight ends. I know we kind of spoke about the premium there and kind of how they fell. Even guys that we're not necessarily seeing have contributed too much over the kind of past couple of years. A Chiga Conquo and Noah Fant, seeing those guys still kind of be valuable in this format to the point where they're kind of picks in this draft. Tyler Conklin, hasn't done an awful lot, but we're thinking he could be Rodgers' kind of obviously primary tight end target this year. So it's just seeing where those are. And if you wanted to do a kind of a 2 tight end build, which I didn't, I've just got the 1 so far. It's where do you take that kind of that second or third if you want to kind of put tight ends in your flex, just given the premium.
Yeah. I like that. Famous Jay brings up, he likes seeing all the varied strategies. He's not going to be shocked with the strange picks being made. And I'll agree with that, though I will point out one thing that we were talking about in the Club Fantasy group chat this morning. In mock drafts, people love to fuck around and find out with quarterbacks. In the real draft, it does not happen. Quarterbacks will go early. I am going to be so interested. Those ancillary quarterbacks I mentioned, your Bryce Youngs, your Geno Smiths, your Russell Wilsons, I'm going to be so interested if they still fall when you see the top half of the quarterbacks move up a little bit. It's a little bit different when it comes to mock drafts. So take those for what you will with a grain of salt, but everybody likes to see what happens if they gamble on quarterbacks and then they end up with Will Levis and Matt Stafford. And they're like, I don't want to gamble on quarterback anymore. No offense to Scampers there. He just happened to be the one that was in the front of my screen. Lewis, I like to let you guys go through and just talk about any picks that you made that you didn't get a chance to talk about. If you had a strategy, if your strategy was forced to change, just how did this draft shake out for you?
Yeah, I enjoyed doing it. I once I found out this opportunity, I actually saved. This was my first mock, and I kind of like.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I kind of like how the team has played out. Coming back to, I didn't get a chance really to stack. I think the interesting one for me was taking James Cook where I did in the middle of a huge wide receiver run. I felt he was a bit of a value there. I kind of locked up him and Dalton Kincaid, who I think could be the top 2 pass catching options for Josh Allen this year, and felt that, we spoke about Cooper Kupp being a value. I kind of felt that I could get a solid wide receiver on the way back around, and ended up with Devonta Smith still, which I was kind of really happy about. And then kind of coming back to Austin's point, I started taking darts on some of those pass catching running backs rather than your traditional just kind of, through the lines running back. So Eckler, Spears and Chase Brown there, who have upside if the other running mate gets hurt. But also, back to the point, we could see some of these guys returning kicks. So I kind of did that a little in those kind of rounds around sort of taking some running backs with upside. Also, I drafted Jonathan Taylor last year in Scott Fishbowl. I remember that. And so that kind of hurt me. So I didn't want to kind of find myself short on running back, despite kind of agreeing with Austin how he took Cortland Sutton there in the 13th as a wide receiver 1 on his team. So the wide receiver value falls, but just with the running backs being pushed up, I felt I needed to take a few gambles, maybe a bit earlier than I typically would have.
I love that you brought that up. So I was literally lamenting to my wife, if you want to know how bad these things burn me. So I started running back last year, and McCaffrey fell to 11. That's not happening this year, but I was able to get Bajan at the 2-2. And then when it came to the 3-2, I was choosing between 2 players, and it was Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall. And I took Jonathan Taylor. I could have had the top 3 running backs in fantasy. I mean, no, Bijan wasn't, but they could have all been on my team last year. And I'm still heartbroken that didn't play out. And I know it's not going to play out this year. Austin, at this point, you know the deal, my friend. Anybody you didn't get a chance to talk about, or anything you do want to talk about?
Yeah, well, first off, what's funny about this is I also drafted Jonathan Taylor this year.
Oh my goodness, it's a very Jonathan Taylor show. I love it.
Last year, and I guess this says something about all of us, the fact that you both were like, well, now I need to guarantee I have good running backs, and I was like, I'm just not drafting running backs.
You're anymore. Like, I'm never touching them again.
Done with that. No, but that was actually my strategy, was to wait as long as I could to draft a running back and see what it felt like, and then to not take a ton of running backs. So ended up starting out, I have Tyreek Hill, Drake London, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, and Garrett Wilson all as starting receivers every week, which feels phenomenal to me. I'm very curious to see if Kyler Murray is going to actually fall this far in Scott Fish drafts. I don't feel convinced because of the rushing upside, and I feel there's a good chance somebody ahead of me will be interested in Kyler Murray. But
I'll give you my mindset again, just giving away strategy here. I plan on going right now. Best player available, non-quarterback. At 2-2, I said if Kyler Murray's there, I'm taking him. So he would not get to you if you were in my draft. So
Yeah, and neither of his receiving options got to me either. I was hoping to either stack him with Trey McBride or Marvin Harrison, and they both went the 2 picks before mine, where I took Garrett Wilson. So that was a bummer. You know, I think I made a mistake by taking the 2 tight ends that I did back to back, Cole Kmet and Dalton Schultz. I think I should have just taken one of them, because at that point in the draft, I'm basically saying I'm starting all receivers in my flex spots.
yeah,
Maybe I'll start one of them in my flex position, but I don't feel convinced about that. And then I basically was like, I'll get an insurance back. I'll take a Kendre Miller now, because if he ends up taking over that role or getting some touch, then I don't have to spend fab on him later on. And then outside of that, I'm just going to take some high upside receivers. So Cortland Sutton scored a ton of touchdowns. Gabe Davis, that's actually a stack with Trevor Lawrence. And if he's getting more deep passes successfully, that could go well. And then Dontavion Wicks, I love him in general. And the fact that he was available in the 15th round, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna take that.
the world is so in on every Green Bay wide receiver. I'm going to be interested to see how this season plays out when it comes to them. Guys, we did so great on time. Very proud of you guys. Real quick, Lewis, when you look at the draft board, did any other team stand out to you? Anybody you want to call out as doing great or terrible?
Not for me. I think, as I say, I'm kind of happy with how my team played out. I've not really, as a first time, not had a chance to kind of multitask to the point of checking the other people's boards. But I do kind of like the contrarian of Scamper's draft, in the sense of, I know you're a big David Montgomery guy last year, Ryan. And
still am.
His situation hasn't really changed much. So to have him as sort of a running back for this team could kind of, just play in the format Scampers could kind of look pretty good at the end of it. Although I think he auto-picked some guy I've actually never heard of in the 14th, Hippen something. So other than
no. That's not an auto pick. Scampers loves taking the most random people. I did a draft with him last night. He took like Kayvon Sheets with his 14th round pick. That is just Scampers trolling and just having fun, and I guess really going at Sleeper's ADP, just trying to get random guys up there. So.
That's very funny.
But no, I do like that a lot. I didn't realize he had Herbert when I was making fun of his quarterbacks. That's a nice little build if you believe in the Rashid Shaheed aspect of this. Austin, any other team stand out to you?
Yeah, I think the team picking from the 4 spot was interesting to me, getting that Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes stack.
Ooh, that's nice. Didn't even notice it. Glad you called it out.
That's pretty nice. I'm a little weary to take Patrick Mahomes early, just because passing yards are devalued this year. But I was listening to Matthew Betts and Kyle Borgnoni on the DFS, the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting podcast, and they pointed out that Mahomes had the most rushing yards he ever had in a season last year, but he scored no rushing touchdowns. And so there's some potential rushing touchdown regression coming his way. I really like that. I will say I'm intrigued by Jaden Daniels in this format, but in the 4th round felt uncomfortable to me. Other than that, I liked this roster.
I think if I had Mahomes, I'd feel a lot more comfortable. But I think if I walk away with a mobile quarterback, I have to walk out of these first 15 rounds with 3. Scott Fishbowl, for those who are not aware, is a full 22-round draft. So there would be 7 more rounds after this, but I'm not trying to use everybody's time up. Though now I know if I do a 30-second clock, it goes way, way smoother. And then I'm going to just lastly draw attention over to Vince Mapstone's team, because I picked from the 11, and he actually went in with a strategy that I fully intended on looking at. What I really love to see here is I would have taken Bijan at 111. He did that. As I mentioned, I would have taken Kyler Murray with 2-2, which means I would have gotten the Kyler Murray, Trey McBride stack, and I probably will just start crying at the draft if that happens. So that's exactly what I'm looking to have happen there. But I love that he was able to wait on wide receivers, still got Devontae Adams. Don't know how I feel about Xavier Worthy, but he got the old guys, which anybody who knows me knows that I have no problem drafting the old guys. DeAndre Hopkins, and then Brandon Cooks in the 14th. I think is such a steal. So kudos to Vince Mapstone there. That's exactly what you're looking for. And if you followed the show for any period of time, you already knew what the oops was as soon as it happened. Why in the world are we drafting kickers, people? This is not how you play fantasy football. You let them fall to you in the last round on Sleeper. You only have to start 1 kicker. It does not matter who it is. I love Brandon Aubrey as much as the next guy. In a league this size, I will not be burning draft capital on a kicker this early. I'll take no questions. That's the answer. Guys, that is the show. Lewis, Thank you so much, my friend. As soon as I scheduled, Lewis doesn't even know this yet. As soon as I said that we were going to do 3 Scott Fishbowl drafts, I had a plan for each of the 3 shows. The first one went off without a hitch. The second did not, but you were listed as my 3rd guest. So I was so happy when you accepted. You were my plan right from the start, and I couldn't have had a better show. Thank you, buddy.
That's really kind of you. Thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and really looking forward to seeing you again next week, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. So Scott Fishbowl live in New York City next week. That'll be me and Lewis doing battle in the Blade division. Austin, let everybody know what you got going on, my friend.
Yeah, most importantly, Brian's going to tell you about this, but you should make sure you're subscribed to the channel because
I was going to say, I'm going to tell him to subscribe. I'm not listing all 9 shows. That is not how I do my outro. So please talk your show up.
I'll talk my show up. You can learn about the other shows later. We dropped our next episode of Summer School, our best ball strategy podcast last night. It's exclusively on YouTube. We talked about how to draft quarterbacks in best ball leagues, and we talked beyond just like how many do you take. We kind of all know how many we should take at this point, but we got into the weeds on what round you should be drafting quarterbacks in for those best ball leagues. Also, we're going to be releasing breakdowns of all 16 week 17 matchups so that you'll have basically a preview of every matchup and every team and how you should draft them in best ball leagues. Matt and I are about to do a marathon recording session on some of those, so it'll be a good time.
I absolutely love that. And what you guys don't know is, and everybody, I've said this a million times, I do these shows to help me get better at fantasy football. So when I have questions for best ball, I'm now dropping it in the chat for these guys to talk about on the show so we can all learn together. One of my most recent is, should we be taking handcuff running backs in best ball? And they said they're going to get that on the show for me. So keep an eye out for that running back show. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Listen, as we've alluded to, Club Fantasy now has 9 shows. 9. We cover everything from redraft, dynasty, best ball, and then we do mock drafts to help you get better at all of them. We have 3 mock draft shows. We even have a golf DFS show. There is no reason for you not to subscribe to our channel. Hit the damn button. We just crossed 1,000 followers. We're going to get to 2,000 with your help. Our next time you're going to find us on air is Dynasty After Party. That's tomorrow morning. I think it's Joel and Josh who are hosting next week or this week. And then our next mock draft is going to be Monday night. That's Mocking with the Stars with Gator J and Chris. Are you subscribed yet? Do you need any more reasons? Folks, always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We will see you at the next mock draft.